Hello, everybody. I'm Ralph Ben-Murgy, and this is Not That Kind of Rabbi. Now, I should clarify for you, I'm not a rabbi. I am a spiritual director, but I'm not a rabbi. If I was a rabbi, though, I wouldn't be that kind of rabbi. And that's why we called this Not That Kind of Rabbi. I think I've said rabbi enough. A couple more times I win a car.
And you're not talking about that convenience change?
No.
Just double checking.
Yeah. So the deal here is we talk about things, but we talk about them through the spiritual lens. I shall rant for a moment, if you don't mind, everyone. One of the things I'm having trouble with is the land dedication. The land dedication that I'm hearing people say, and they really mean it, I think, or else they've been told they should really mean it. And I'm being honest about this because I do, full disclosure, I do work in political communications at times for progressive movements and environmental causes. And, you get to a place and they go, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of, and then, they go through it. And there's just something about that I find has become gratuitous in a lot of cases. And I know it was started with the best of intentions, but it's become, I don't know, softened around the edges, obligatory, perfunctory, happy we got that out of the way, let's move on, which is kind of the way I see the whole relationship we've had with First Nations as it is anyway. I remember years ago I was doing, they tried to do this game show in Canada, and I was getting into television at the time, and the powers that be at the CBC thought I should be one of the contestants. And they asked what charity you wanted to give to. And I said, well, I don't know if you'd call it a charity, but it has charitable status. So I wanted to give it to the Indigenous Center in Toronto. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I had gone to school at the University of Alberta, got kicked out of the fine arts acting program after about a year. But I'd never been out west. I'd always lived in Toronto growing up when we came from Morocco. And there I was in Edmonton, and I was on the north side. The university's on the south side. I was on the north side one night, and I saw devastation. I saw cultural genocide going on around me, people dead on their feet. And they were native. And I'd never, in Toronto, there was one corner at Spadina College, and that was where I saw anybody who was native and wasn't doing well. If they weren't, I didn't see them because they were just part of everybody else's culture. But there I was in this. And then later I lived in Winnipeg, and it was worse. We were at the CBC building on Portage, and just down the street was the Club Morocco. And I did a late night music show called Nightlines. And I'd get out at 3 a.m. after we'd finished taping, and there'd be fist fights going on right in front of the window. And it was people who were inebriated. Almost all were native. I did nothing. I yelled. I said, get away, stop it. I didn't know what to do. And I just felt like this is our tragedy. We talk about the rights of people in all kinds of parts of the world. And yet in our very own world, we have people who can't drink their own water. We have mercury in water at Grassy Narrows that's been going on forever. And it's never part of a conversation during an election. You don't win an election by championing these causes. So these things have always saddened me. And so I've always taken it all very hard and very serious. But over the same amount of years, I've encountered a man named Hayden Taylor who has an ability to be who he is as a native person and is funny. And you're not supposed to be funny. You're supposed to be tragic. You're supposed to be serious. You're supposed to be angry. But
I'm working on it.
It's not supposed to be funny. So this man is actually profound and funny, and I love it. And I've always wanted to talk to him, and we have over the years a few times. But this is a chance to see things through a spiritual lens together as two people who happen to live on this land at this moment in time. And hello, how are you?
As we say on my reserve, grazie. I am adequate.
Adequate.
I am adequate. At the day is still young. I don't want to make a judgment on a day yet, so I'm going to hedge my bets by saying adequate.
Are you an optimistic person or a pessimistic person?
It, again, depends on the time of the day. I'd actually, in all seriousness, I'd have to say I'm primarily an optimist.
I don't see how you couldn't be and write as much as you write, because you would just go with, who cares? I'm not writing.
I know. Or whine or complain. Yeah. No. I'm one of the things that motivates me for what I'm doing is the fact that one time I had a conversation with my mother, and I was trying to, when I was younger, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I was toying with the idea of being a writer. And I was talking with my mother about that. And I was like, I was up for some job that I wasn't sure I wanted. And my mother looked at me with a very perplexed look and said that she had been working for 30 years, essentially cooking and cleaning for white people, and said that she'd never had a single job she enjoyed in 30 years. And that stayed with me. So part of my so-called optimism is I try and only do stuff that I find interesting, that I find necessary, that I find has a point to it, and that is enjoyable. So I wrap that all up, and there are a lot of unfortunate negative things in the Native community, in the Canadian community, in the world community. And you have to be optimistic if you're going into battle. So, yes, I like to think good things, which frequently gets me in trouble with a lot of my compatriots in the Native community. In fact, I've been told one time I was being commissioned to write a play for a Native theater company, and the artistic director said, "Drew, we all know you can be funny. I'd rather you be serious." Oh, okay.
I'll get on that.
Dead kittens and sick children. It's like, and I've gone on this conversation so many times where I talk about, for the last 30, 40 years, since what I refer to as the contemporary Native literary renaissance, there's been basically three storylines explored and plowed by the Native writers of this country. And they're basically historical narratives, victim narratives, and the byproducts of what I refer to as post-contact stress disorder. And I understand it. That all makes sense, because when an oppressed people get their voice back, they're going to write about being oppressed.
Right.
And that makes perfect sense. And I was coming of age during this, and I began to think, in order to become a First Nations author, am I going to have to be dark, depressing, bleak, sad, and angry? And I was wrestling with that, because one of the things I've been very fortunate about is being born in the bosom of Indigenous humor. And I've been to 140, 150 Native communities across Canada, United States. And everywhere I've been greeted with a laugh, a smile, and a joke. And I wasn't seeing this in our theater, in our novels. It was all the characters were either oppressed, depressed, or suppressed. Right. And as I said, I was going through an existential problem with all this, because it just wasn't my.
Did you feel guilty? Did you think,
I'm
supposed to be angry, I'm supposed to be traumatized?
And I was angry. I grew up on a reserve. I grew up in a house with no plumbing or no electricity. My mother worked all the time. There were times where we would run out of propane, and we'd have to spend 2-3 days with no heating whatsoever. Yeah, I went through all of that, and nothing I could do about it. I just use that old cliche. It gave me character.
Right.
But for me, the turn was when I met an elder from the Blood Reserve in Alberta who said that, in his opinion, for Native people, humor is the WD-40 of healing. Mm-hmm. And that stayed with me. And so that sort of became the focus of a lot of my work, is I wanted to work on the healing. And I know for a fact Indigenous people have the most wonderfully developed sense of humor. I did a documentary on it for the National Film Board. I wrote a book exploring and deconstructing it called Me Funny. And so that became my journey, sort of exploring, celebrating the Indigenous sense of humor.
Well, in the Jewish tradition, we have lots of trauma to fall back on.
You do?
And pretty funny people.
I was invited to a conference on multicultural humor, and of all places, Trivandrum, if I can pronounce it, in India.
Wow.
down in Kerala. And it was a conference on humor, on cultural humor. And I followed a woman from the University of Tel Aviv
Oh, yeah.
who did a presentation on humor and the Holocaust,
Wow.
right? And it's all about survival humor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And my lecture followed hers, and it was literally along the same path about using humor to heal. And it was a fascinating experience.
Well, when we talk about which holiday we're doing as Jews, we say, well, the way this works is they tried to kill us, they didn't make it, and let's eat.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
So, your mother, was she a positive person?
My mother was. I mean, my mother was one of my lines about my family is the fact that I come from both a big and a small family at the same time. I come from a big family. My mother was the oldest of 14, which is what used to happen before they had the internet. Right? But at the same time, I come from a small family because I'm a single child of a single parent. And
Wow.
Yeah. So I had a huge extended family. I had about 20, 25 first cousins.
Right.
But in our house, it was just me and my mother. And so I had my own universe within the four walls. And if I wanted to go out and play with people, I just had to walk out the door, and I had a whole plethora of cousins to play with. So my mother was a very hard-working woman. She would get up at 5, 6 in the morning to be driven into Peterborough, where she cooked and cleaned at nursing homes or whatever. And then would come back at about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and then go to bed at 8 or 9 at night. Wow. So she had a tough life, but to me, she was always positive. She always had a good sense of humor, unless something was wrong. Right. So yeah, I'd have to say so. Yeah,
well, because I was thinking when she was giving you the advice about work, or just the experience that she had of work, I just thought, but on the other hand, your optimism and your humor must have come from someplace, and if she was the influence in your life, it could have gone either way.
Well, yeah, in all fairness too, my mother was very supportive, and in some cases was not very supportive. I told her I wanted to be a writer, and my mother looked at me and said, "Why do you want to be a writer? It's not going to get you anywhere." Right?
Well, that's what happens when you say you want to be in the arts.
Yeah, I know. And so I got into the arts, and somebody once asked my mother, like, 10, 15 years ago, maybe whatever, what exactly does your son do? And I was on book 23, 24 at the time. And she said, I think he writes or something. It was just not within her. She had a grade 6 education. Her first language was Anishinaabe. So the idea of her son being a writer was just not within her area of expertise.
One of the things in some of the reading I've done is we tend to glorify native way of life. Right? That it's these wonderfully connected to the earth, spiritual people, and who had an idyllic existence before we got here. And then you sort of square that up with internecine warfare and using clamshells to tear skin off of the person on the other side.
Which I have to say, I have not personally witnessed.
Not in that sense. But, what do you think of that idea?
Well, the thing I always try and stress is the Indigenous population of Canada, both post and pre-contact, were human. We had interesting warfare. We hunted, we fished, we had problems with our neighbors. I'm no expert on pre-contact civilization, but I do think our attitude towards the land was a lot healthier than contemporary society. Yes, we had traditional rivalries, which were exacerbated. I think that's the word.
I can never say that.
I know,
word.
Exactly. By contact, right? You have to keep in mind, contact happened and moved further west. Various nations were pushed further west, so they would bump into each other and they would compete over the same resources. So the Lakota Sioux and the Ojibway became went into conflict because of that squeezing. So, and it's my opinion that contact, because it changed the way everything was run, exacerbated, again that word, the situation, so that when finally the dominant culture moved into those areas where the warfare was then happening, a lot of them didn't really realize that it had been instigated by that contact, even though it was sort of still 50 years off, but they've been pushed that way.
Right. So the perversion of the existence
Yeah.
created more tensions. But I still think that I've been doing some writing on aging and ageism and all these different pieces. And one of the things that
Aging sucks.
wow, that's a short book. What am I writing? There's 70,000 words later. But
My people are brief and pithy.
But the other part of it to me was, if I wore, the robes of a shaman and came from a reserve and walked through the street, you'd think I was an elder, but I'm a white guy. So I'm just a senior looking for a discount at Shoppers Drug Mart, right? I mean, there's no spiritual element to our aging, but your people get to say an elder. Like you just said, I spoke to an elder. Mm-hmm. One of the things, a compliment I've received is from a native friend who called me uncle. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you're calling me uncle? I'm honored by that, right? Right. Well, so there's all these pieces that, white guys don't do.
Well, for me, the difference is that my personal definition of what wisdom is, it's intelligence plus experience.
Right.
I know people in their teens, 20s, and 30s who are very, very smart, but not necessarily experienced. So their intelligence is very specific and short in that aspect. And I know people who are very experienced at what they do, but can't extend that experience to other issues. So for me, wisdom and elder with a capital E is somebody who has both, is very, very smart, intelligent, and has lived a full life and can apply the many things they've learned in life to different situations. I think we both know there, as I was talking, the capital E, there's capital E and small e. I think we all know people who are old, but not necessarily wise.
Sure.
And
because they never cultivated their wisdom.
They never utilized it. They never thought about it. They never, exactly. Whereas as the elders we're talking about are people who have done both, who are very smart, paid attention, know how the world operates, and have the ability to utilize all of those decades of experience and utilize it in today's world.
I do workshops occasionally on what I call aging to saging. So how you turn yourself from somebody who's just aging, and in our culture, you just back into it. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want anyone to know your age, because then they won't hire you anymore. They're looking for the young you, all these things. But there's also the aspect of, as you said, you can be old and stupid. You don't, just because you're older, it doesn't mean you're wiser.
Right.
But you do have to take an inventory of life. Like in the workshop, we do obituaries, where people write their own obituary. Then we do what we call in the Jewish tradition the vidui, which is a reckoning. Right. So at the Day of Atonement, there's a prayer you do where you knock on your chest and you list every fault and sin you could be culpable of. And you absorb them, that you have lied to someone, that you have cheated somehow, that you have sinned in some way. And sin is not evil act, it's misguided direction, right? So you do all that. But in the vidui you say, who have you loved, and what are you most proud of? And then what do you regret? And then what would you like to be remembered for? So by doing things like that, you start to take and cultivate and integrate and say, what was my life? When it comes to your spiritual life, how would you describe your spiritual life?
Okay, first of all, let me address something I said earlier that I think I need to clarify. When I said aging sucks, you caught me on a bad day. I've developed tendonitis in this shoulder. And I'm as of last year, I'm diabetic.
Yeah.
So it's like yes, aging sucks, but then on the reciprocal or the opposite end, I don't think I could have sat here and had this conversation with you 20 years ago.
Right.
It's like I've amassed a certain amount of knowledge from experience, from reading, from writing, and from meeting people that now I can sit and sit around a mic and chat with you about something, which I'm fairly sure I couldn't do 20 years ago.
Okay.
So when I say aging sucks, I'm talking to physically.
Well, I mean, the body is, as you get older.
It has an expiry date.
Well, it also, you feel senses of betrayal. Before, you could always rely on it. I have a hand right now that is doing a little trembling because I had a torn rotator cuff. And I'm thinking, this is what my parents used to talk about while I was watching TV. And they were talking about, did you hear about Sam? He's not.
Yeah.
Now it's us. So it's kind of the way it is.
I get out of bed in the morning and my feet hurt for no reason. I thought, what did you do last night while I was sleeping?
They aged.
I guess so, yes.
They're pickling. All right. So spiritually.
Yes, sir.
Where do you sit?
I am sort of a lapsed traditionalist.
Okay.
Right.
Explain.
My reserve is actually united. And one of the number one questions I get asked when I go out and talk in places is, were you part of the residential school thing? And my reserve is just south of that Catholic Anglican line.
Nice.
Right? So only, this is how it was explained to me, only kids that came from bad homes or were bad children were scooped up and shipped off to residential school in Brantford. Right? So we had a day school. My mother and I went to the Mud Lake Indian Day School. So our reserve is fairly united. Is united, and there was actually one. I don't know where it was. One United residential school somewhere. I don't remember. Anyways, getting back to your question. So I grew up in a Christian environment. My aunt used to teach Sunday school, and I would help her, and then. As I got older, and left the reserve, I got to have much more experience with traditionalism. My reserve wasn't a traditional community in that sense. And I know it was driven underground in so many different communities. And it wasn't until about the 70s that it began to rise up and assert itself again and struggles to achieve the prominence it had before contact. So I am very much well aware of the spirituality that exists within the First Nations culture. Some of it is pan-Indian, pan-indigenous. Like the Sweat Lodge has taken up prominence in many indigenous communities. You've seen your Dreamcatcher. I've seen Dreamcatchers in Australia. I've seen them in Germany. I've seen them all over the place. And
Mexico.
Sweetgrass and sage is now very popular in places where sweetgrass and sage does not grow. Same with tobacco. All these different things. So it's become sort of a sense of pan-spiritualism, which I think is a good thing in its own way. There's some communities where it's been just absolutely wiped out, the spirituality. I remember I was in two different places. I was in some place, I think in northern Saskatchewan and in southern Alberta. I think it was the Blood Reserve, a standoff. And in northern Saskatchewan, in this Cree community, it had been so heavily Catholicized that everybody had French or Scottish names, and there was no traditionality left in the communities. But the ironic thing was the Cree language was very strong. Almost everybody, down to kids, spoke Cree well. And then I go to a place like the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta, where the language has been almost wiped out, but their spiritual structure is very much well intact. Even though there was a residential school on the reserve, it went underground, but it remained very, very strong. So there was this guy who was from there teaching in northern Saskatchewan, where he was like, he's like, I wish I had the command of language that they had. And there's people up there who were saying, we wish we knew our traditions the way he knew his traditions.
So when you think of your traditions, what has, from united to your traditions to now you say lapsed tradition, let's go into the tradition part.
Okay.
When you came out of united into tradition, what did you find?
Well, it's a bunch of the obvious. First of all, it is the love, respect, and understanding of how important the land is and where we fit into that grand mosaic. I can't go anywhere. I travel a lot. 4 months ago, I was in Australia. 3 months ago, I was in Arizona, New Mexico, Washington State, and Oregon. Then 2 months ago, I was in Brazil. Last month, I was in Mexico. Next month, I'm going to be in Germany.
Wow.
I cannot travel without like stepping off the plane, looking around, and almost doing that Pope thing where you get down and kiss the ground. Right. I don't go that far.
But in your heart.
But in my heart. And I have been known when I'm by myself just to sit down and touch the ground. So I am very much aware of when I travel, the land I'm on and how that land helps create those indigenous people that have populated that area. And you go to places like the Caribbean where in most of the islands, the indigenous people have been completely wiped out of existence. And Thompson Highway had this speech once when he goes through Europe, and he says, Europe, when he steps off the plane, he said, it smells different because there's not 1 yard of Europe that hasn't been drenched in blood for 2,000 years. And he says the land reflects that, and I remember that, and I keep that when I travel, and I look around, I see how the land is being treated, and how the people have been created by the land, and how the dominant culture is sort of dealing with those two issues.
There's a lot in that. You know that you made a gesture with your hand about when no one's looking. Basically, I touch the ground, so it's not. You don't get to do it with an open celebratory ritual.
Right.
You just sort of...
Well, sometimes it is a celebratory ritual, and sometimes it's a personal thing, right? You know, oftentimes the most personal things are the deepest things, where, you know, you can go to all these different ceremonies from every different thing, but every different culture, every different religion. But I think it's the personal ones that are the most intrinsic, the one that have more of an effect on the individual rather than the pomp and circumstances.
So is there in your schema, your spiritual schema, is there God?
Oh, of course. There's the Creator.
The Creator.
The Creator who is basically, you know, responsible for everything. And there's, again, one, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Well, go for it.
Let me focus. First of all, at time of contact in 1497, when John Cabot landed somewhere on the East Coast, it's estimated that there were over 50 to 60 separate languages and dialects spoken in Canada. That's like discovering Europe. I'm sure there are over 50 to 60 separate languages in Europe, yet there's no one European anything.
Right.
So in talking about the Creator, talking about God, talking about every individual indigenous person's relationship to creation, I can't give you one definite answer for everybody, because there's so many different perspectives on how they relate to the Creator and the land. Just like, you know, as I say, Finland is different from Holland, is different from France, which is different from Portugal. So when you were asking what is the indigenous relationship to God, or I forget how you put it, I can't answer that. I can only answer mine.
For yours. So what is yours?
Mine is I have a very strong belief that there is a higher purpose, a higher understanding, whether it's a God, whether whatever. I just think that there's so many unexplainable things in this universe that believe it or not, there's so many unexplainable things that there has to be an explanation for it. That being a higher understanding. That's the way I prefer to do it.
Right. So even if it's unknowable to us, there's something going on.
Yes, the term Gitche Manitou, right, which has entered pop culture, meaning Great Spirit. It actually does not mean Great Spirit.
What does it mean?
Great Mystery.
Ah, beautiful.
That is actually what it means, great mystery.
For many people, the spiritual path is questions, not answers. Right? So it would be the great mystery. So if you open yourself to that, to the great mystery, and you connect yourself to the land as your intermediary between you and that mystery, and that everything is alive, that this entire universe is alive. How do you fit back into this rather mundane materially driven kind of culture that we're in now? How do you get yourself, back into, hey, how are you?
Ice cream helps.
Which kind?
Maple walnut.
Pralines and cream. You are absolutely wrong on the maple walnut.
No. Quit trying to oppress me with your ice cream favorites.
Yeah, Neapolitan.
That's right.
Yeah, but how, where do you put that? Let's go to that thing I said at the beginning before we started talking about the land dedication.
I first discovered the land dedication in, of all places, Australia. I was there for a theater conference in Australia, and I was sitting there. This was about 12 years ago, 12 years ago, because the whole land dedication has only been around for about 6, 7, 8 years. Yeah. So about 10, 12 years ago, I was in Australia, and they were doing that. And I remember sitting there going, oh, that is so cool. That is so wonderful. And I wrote it in an article back then. And I just thought, wouldn't it be cool if we can do this here? And then about 4 or 5 years later, it started popping up at various events. And I'm sort of going, oh, that is so cool. And I know what you're saying about it's become kind of ubiquitous right now. Yeah. Does it have a relevance? I remember growing up, going to school, we had to say both the Lord's Prayer and sing O Canada. And I mean, it was literally just going through the motions, You just sit there, you sing, you do it, waiting for it to be over so you can go and do something else. It meant nothing.
Right.
So in terms of this, I'm sure to some people out there, it meant nothing. They listen to it, and I hear it a lot when I'm at a play or something like that, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are saying, "Okay, let's move on. Let's go to the play," and that is something up to the individual. Did you see my play Cottagers and Indians?
No.
There's actually one of the things in it. I break the fourth wall, and I have the native character in conversation with the white cottagers. Suddenly, goes, "Oh yeah!" Before I forget, he turns to the audience and he does a land acknowledgement in the middle of it because, oh yeah, right, we got to do this, and he does it, and then he goes right back into the conversation with the woman.
Fantastic.
So it's now become part of the zeitgeist, the pop culture, right? So my opinion on it is a strong, important gesture that people. Let me put it this way: it's there, and I'd rather have people hear it and ignore it than not hear it at all.
Right. Yeah, I totally hear that. Yeah. So is there more? So what do we? The problem for me is that you can then go, well, that's taken care of.
I feel good now.
Yeah. And meanwhile, we're still in hell, right? I mean, I don't see this getting better. I mean, if you fluke out, I'm reading, I just started a book on the Osage, and, where they get sent to Oklahoma because it's like, okay.
That's Indian country. It was called.
Yeah, garbage country. Meanwhile, they get oil, and they're richer than anybody, right? So that doesn't fit the paradigm. You're supposed to be shuffled off. Where do you, what's the way forward for instance, I've worked with groups that have tried to engage politically with Native political movements, and there's a wall there. I don't know who made it. I don't know why it's hard to walk over it. I even drive by a reserve and think, can I go in there? It's like being a Jewish guy and walking by a Catholic church. Mm-hmm. I'd like to go in and experience their service.
You just want the free wine.
And the biscuit. Yeah. No, I like the idea of witnessing their service, but I'm afraid I'm going to do the wrong thing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm going to walk in there and they're going to go, well, that guy's, what's he standing up for? He's supposed to be sitting down. He's not one of us. And I get the same feeling when I think about, should I go to Six Nations? It's near me in Hamilton. Should I just go in and think, well, what do I do? Where's my point of contact? How do I come in there and say, I'm with you. I don't know where the bridge is for that. How do I do that?
Well, I get that from a lot of people who I don't know how to put this, aren't well versed with the current socio-political res system. The truth being told, many reserves harvest a sizable amount of revenue from non-native tourists.
Right.
My reserve has a place called Wetang's Ojibway Crafts, and it has everything from $100,000 paintings and sculptures to $2 wooden tomahawks.
So that's my way in, to go to the gift store.
I would have to say
how do I go in and just go, hi, what's going on?
Well, I don't know. Like, what, do you just knock on a door and say, you got anything to eat?
Is Drew home?
Yeah. He owes me money.
He left his thing. I've been looking for him for weeks. It's driving me
nuts.
His
retainer.
And I mean his mouth retainer. I don't mean his lawyer. No, but I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, if I go to a small white town and I show up, how do I get into that? Do I just?
But how do we hug? How do we walk into each other's space and go, I want to be one of the good guys in this conversation, and not one of the ones who goes, oh, too bad about that, moving on. And it's not enough for me to sit there and listen to a land dedication. But there's this thing where I don't even know if it's a trust issue, right? Because I'm the white guy. So
some of my best friends are white.
And some of your best friends aren't.
There are wonderful, clever people that have been maligned far too long. But to answer your question, though, I don't know. It's like if I go to a small town, how do I get into that small town's community? It's
you go to the restaurant, you hang out, and you come back the next day and the next day, I guess.
Well, yes, that could work on most reserves. Just don't drink their water. First of all, get us good, clean water. That's a good place. Bring water in.
I'm not the guy. Right?
Nobody's the guy.
Well, the government is the guy in this.
The government is made up of what is it, 330 MPs or something like that?
Who all have to listen to their leaders, and are all it's puppet theater.
This wonderful thing you call democracy?
Yeah. Well, it was an attempt. It sometimes serves a purpose.
What's that description? It's the best possibilities of all the worst options?
Yeah, which is, a way of feigning away from its deficiencies because of the way we practice it. Is there anything that we can, when you think of yourself in terms of why you're here, because I always wonder, somebody's prolific as you. What is it, 33 books now?
My 33rd book came out, yes. And I'm this week I'm in the middle of a new novel. I'm commissioned for 2 plays. I've got another book of essays and articles in my mind, and I'm hopefully I've got people interested in working on television series with me.
This is crazy. So what is the fuel? What is it that, because most people can't deliver like that?
I'm gonna use a very odd metaphor.
Okay.
It's like working out, like in a gym.
Okay.
You go, day one, you go and you do back and shoulders. Next day, you go and you do legs and core. Other day, you do chest and shoulders and arms, whatever I left out. Basically, for me, writing, depending on what I'm writing, uses different parts of my brains. So if I write a novel, I'm done. I don't want to think or work on a novel for a long time. So I'll work on a play, which is a different structure, a different form that is different. And then after that, I'll go work on some essays, maybe a television show, whatever. So that's how I sort of keep writing, because it's just using different parts of my mind, like going to the gym, using different parts of my body, letting the other part heal. As for the stories, I'm a firm believer that the world is full of interesting things. The creator, if I may use that term, is a far better writer than I am. I just plagiarize the creator.
Tell me more about that.
You sit on a bus for an hour looking around, and you look at people, and some people, like especially a city bus, you just sort of see these people. Many of them are just stories waiting to be written. You watch the news and you see all these things happening out there. You walk the streets. There's just so many different things happening at any given time that if you don't see it, you're blind. People ask me if I ever get writer's block, and I envy those that get writer's block.
Why?
Because I'm sitting here right now talking. I've got 4 novels in my head. I've got 3 plays in my head. I've got short stories, essays. I just don't have the time to write them all. And just because But
you don't see them as coming from you. They're coming through you.
Yeah. As I said, the world's a far more interesting place than I am. I just look around. I see what's happening. And as with any writer, it makes me ask questions. Why did this happen? What would happen if this happened? Who's involved in this? How can I make this interesting? And I, it just it's hard to explain the process. It is part of the great unknown, the great mystery.
So the mystery. Now, so when you see yourself, other people see you and call you an indigenous writer.
Yes.
Are you good with that, or are you just like, I'm a human?
Well, first of all, as you say, I'm sitting across from you with blue eyes and light hair and before Mexico, a fair skin. It is a problem. I mean, I grew up on a reserve till I was 18, and then I moved to Toronto specifically for college and Thai food. There's not a lot of Thai food on the reserve. And so my entire psyche, my entire upbringing is reserve based. I am what's called a res Indian. And almost everything I've ever written has been indigenously based because that's how I got started. That was my frame of reference. And now that's what people expect from me.
Right.
I heard me mention that I'm being approached to work on 2 television series. The death rate. I'm not expecting to get any of these. Like there's like 20 projects of which 1 or 2 will get made.
Yeah.
So this may or may not happen. But again, they're native themed and they go to me because I've had experience writing for television. I'm happy with that because I think the dominant culture has had several thousands of years of writing. They have an amazing arsenal of literature, whereas basically Native people have been writing their stories for maybe 30, 40 years. And we still have a lot more to write.
Does that fuel you in terms
completely.
of all that prolific writing? It's just like, I got to get a lot of this out now.
I think so. You heard me mention the contemporary Native literary renaissance. I am so blessed, lucky, and honored to be on the first wave of that.
Yeah.
To be a part of it and get out there because I was there with Thompson Highway, Daniel David Mose, etc. Now, what is exciting right now about this whole genre is I told you earlier about what was basically the 3 themes emanating from Native literature for a while. It was, but now it's beginning to expand. It's beginning to get really interesting. Native literature is beginning to explore the dominant culture's genre fiction. My first novel was a Native vampire novel. My second novel is a form that I hitherto did not know until I wrote it, something called magic realism.
Yeah.
My last collection of short stories was science fiction. The novel I'm working on right now is a horror novel. Tom King, when he's not writing award-winning fiction and nonfiction, he writes murder mysteries, right? And so it's really interesting the things that are happening right now. The most successful YA novel in Canada in the last 2 years was written by Sherry Demerlane and is a dystopian YA native novel. In America, one of the most successful writers in the last 3 years is a Pueblo woman named Rebecca Roanhorse, who wrote a novel called Trail of Lightning that won so many awards and so well liked that she was commissioned by the Star Wars franchise to write a Star Wars book.
Wow.
So, and it has nothing to do with being Native.
Right.
Like her award-winning book, Trail of Lightning, was Native based, right? So getting back to your question with me, yeah, I can see myself someday doing something non-Native. My dream someday is to write a Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
I would, I can't say that I might not sneak a Native character in it or something like that, but...
Well, they had one on Voyager.
No, they didn't.
He sucked. I'm a Trekkie.
So am I.
That series...
Live long and prosper.
Live long. That series sucked. That particular one, I liked. I literally like every other iteration so far. I haven't seen
even Enterprise.
Yeah, you know what? I really dug Enterprise. I have to say, I got into it. I think I'd seen one years ago and thought, that sucks. And then it was on Netflix, and I started watching it, and I thought, I like this idea that you can't. The transporter is something you're afraid of.
It's a new technology.
You can get scrambled in this thing, which is my Galaxy Quest, right? When they try to get the guys to come back up, and it's squirt. Yeah, but for me, that became this really funky. you can only get to warp 5 kind of thing. And there were things I liked about, and I liked T'Pol as the sexy Vulcan.
I know. You notice all the men wore long,
and
bulky robes.
She was in spandex the whole way. You know, and I get that because there's always one of those in every Star Trek. Uhura, you know, it's part of the mystique. It's sort of like Commedia dell'arte. There have to be archetypes.
Exactly.
You got to use them all in there. Like Second City has to have, you know, the overweight guy and the skinny guy. It's all the way you do it.
Did you see the documentary on Deep Space Nine? No, Deep Space Nine.
Oh yeah, no.
The guys who created Deep Space Nine, probably getting off topic here, did a documentary about the arc of that series.
Oh yeah.
And one of the interesting things that came up is the actor and the showrunner had purposely made Garak. You remember Garak?
Yeah.
He was gay.
Ah.
And he was after Bashir.
Oh.
If you remember, they had a lot of lunches together.
Yeah, that's right.
And they never came out.
And the doctor. Yeah.
And they never came out and said it. And he says that's one of my greatest regrets, that we pushed the envelope on everything, but we never quite pushed that envelope enough.
They should have. So if you did a native Star Trek, what would it look like?
Oh, a native Star Trek.
What would it look like?
Would
the command structure be the same?
Oh, you're catching me on a fly here. But what would be interesting is the fact that it would be the Star Trek universe are the colonizers.
Absolutely.
So if you put native people in, it would completely shift the paradigm.
Because right now it's a colonial enterprise. Every one of them is a colonial enterprise.
To go out and seek new worlds and new civilizations, right?
Yes.
And then the whole...
non-interference with the savages.
Yes, exactly. Let them develop under their own... Yeah, right. Yeah,
so you'd have to reverse all that and have the technology go into the indigenous culture. But then once they leave their own... Would you be happy if indigenous culture recolonized Canada back towards what pre-contact?
Well, getting into the world of science fiction.
Yes.
There's a couple of interesting. There was a book written, back in the 70s, I think. You know the name Martin Cruz Smith?
Yes.
Right? He wrote Gorky Park. He wrote Stallion's Gate, all these different things. He was originally a journalist for, I think, Rolling Stone. And he had a friend who had a publishing company. He's one quarter, I think it's Navajo.
Right.
And he had a friend who had a publishing company that was about to go under. And he said, I need a book in 30 days. Here's your chance. So he sat down and he wrote this book in 30 days. And it was called The Indians Won. And the first part of it takes place in the mid 1870s, just after Little Bighorn, when all the great chiefs, Geronimo's there, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, all these different chiefs from all around who are just beginning to get into conflict, decide to band together. And they keep almost the interior part of America indigenous. And America, as we know it, is basically a 200-mile periphery along the coasts.
Right.
And so it's about what would have happened if they had remained native, and the rest,
Nice.
It was actually quite poorly written.
Yeah, but it's a great idea.
It's a great idea, kind of poorly written. But getting back to, again, your original idea, one of the projects I would love to do if I could find the time and the effort, because it takes so much research, is what would happen. I'm a history buff. Columbus and all that sailed over in 1492. Part of that was the after effects of the Great Plague of 100 years prior to that, which had killed off, I think it was a quarter of Europe. Right. What if the plague had done worse and killed off half and delayed that whole thing, whereas Columbus's ancestors had been killed or whatever, and he never ended up going, where the civilizations in North America had been allowed to progress, that the Aztecs had gotten bigger, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy had expanded, the Ojibway there's an island near Thunder Bay that looks like it's been mined for copper for thousands of years.
Right.
And all this stuff happened if the Haida, their huge, magnificently designed war canoes, they discovered the sail.
Right.
If all these things had happened, and then Europe had recovered 200, 300, 400 years later and had come over, what would have happened?
Right.
Or that'd
be cool.
That would be so cool. So that alternate universe, multiple universe type scenario, that's on my bucket list to write someday.
God, there's so much inside you that you just keep bringing it out. I mean,
I can be quiet.
no, but I do see that urgency, like the urgency of the
I'm
writing.
57.
Right, but look at the rate you've been going since you were 27. I mean, you just
Yeah, I actually started in my mid-20s because I was my grade 11 English teacher, my mother told me not to be a writer. So I gave it up. My first legitimate writing credit was of all things, I'm sure you found this out, an episode of The Beachcombers.
Yes.
I wrote it when I was 25. Because it was like it was a bizarre series of circumstances. I was asked to submit some ideas for the heck of it. I did it just as a joke because I'd grown up with it. They bought the first one. I had to write it. I wrote it. They shot it, and it was their 17th season ender.
17th season.
Yeah, they were on for 19 seasons.
I know. You know, what always killed me about that show is they were on for 19 seasons. When they got canceled, everybody in the show was complaining bitterly. And I thought, are you crazy?
I know.
You got 19 seasons out of that sucker.
And it had become such a 9-to-5 job that they'd show up at like 8 in the morning, go home at like 6 at night, which never happens.
Anybody seen Relic?
Yeah,
Has
exactly.
anyone seen Relic?
Yeah.
All right. So when you see now, and you are talking about getting older, does everything start to take on a different lens? Because, you know, when we're young, it's all about what can I do? Am I capable of this?
Yeah.
What's my ambition how's my ego going to help me get through this? Now, you know, in the Hindu culture, they talk about the householder part of your life where you make family, you raise family, you have house, you know, you have a career. But then you get to the other side of your life, the contemplative part of your life. You still are highly productive, but are you seeing some shift in yourself?
Yeah. Earlier we were talking about, you know, getting old sucks, and I have to say, the older I get, the more at ease and confident I get. When I was younger, I was always nervous, uncomfortable. Can I do this? Will this be okay? What am I going to do next? Now, it's sort of like, I've got some money in the bank. I can do this. And more importantly, every project I do because I want to do it. You know,
Right.
Struggling writers, we take contracts to write industrials
Sure.
or whatever, PSAs, whatever. Now I only do the projects I want, and now it's getting to the point where I have to turn down projects I want to do just because I have other projects that I want to do more.
Right.
I'm still very contemplative because I just I've traveled the world, I've met interesting people, I've had interesting relationships, and it's just, the older I get, the more amazing I find the world. And I still love traveling. It's getting harder to travel. I don't recover as much from jet lag as quickly, but I just have a great appreciation of what this planet can offer and what I can offer the planet.
It's interesting. It doesn't sound like when you say the world is amazing, and then I think of climate change, and I think we're at war with ourselves. We're at war with nature. We're at war with God, you know, that we've become God, and we're not very good at it. And I wonder, what place does that have in your universe, that Australia's on fire? What place, for someone who wants to touch the ground when they get out, where's your connection now with all that?
Well, I think that you can find beauty anywhere. I think you can find resilience. You can find, I don't know if this is a word, amazingness in the depths of a garbage dump. That probably sounds too wussy or whatever, but I do believe that. Yes, there are so many tragedies happening in this world right now. Australia, I was in Australia 3 months ago. I was in Melbourne for the Writers' Festival. And it's tragic. You look at the video of that and you just hang your head and just sort of think, what are we doing to this planet? And the fact that some people don't even realize it. You know, they're just blind to it, and just sort of, you know, they're using the cliche. They're playing their instruments while the Titanic is sinking. You know, get a boat, start bailing,
Change course.
Exactly. There's alternate things you can do, and you just wish people would do it. If I stop finding beauty, if I stop finding the human situations, then I think I've lost. And the bad forces in this world have won, and there's no point in writing anymore. I'll build myself a bunker somewhere, get 40 tons of maple walnut ice cream.
Canned corned beef?
No.
Hey, come on, it's a bunker.
I like my beef uncorned. It's a native thing.
You know, I think sometimes people think native people are supposed to be the ones that are going to bail us out.
We'd love to, but we have no power. I should say, we have very little power.
Well, the pipelines in Canada, you have native blockades.
Yes, but some native people have accepted it. One of the interesting things is not everybody realized that, again, there were over 50 separate languages and dialects. There's separate nations with different priorities.
Absolutely.
And some nations have said, come right through, pay us and you may use our land. Others have said, no, don't. Yeah. So it's not a unified front.
When you say you're a lapsed traditionalist, why are you lapsed?
I lack energy. It takes.
I don't think so.
It takes energy to be a hardcore fundamentalist.
Were you fundamentalist?
No, I was never a fundamentalist. I'm again using humor to deflect.
Yes, I picked up on that.
No, I was never a fundamentalist because I have too much healthy respect for what people believe, what all people believe, right?
But you were a traditionalist.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we have amongst our, and I still am in some aspects.
Like?
We have what are called the 7 grandfather teachings, which are very similar to the 7, whatever it is in the Bible. You have the 7 deadly sins, the 7 virtues.
Yes.
Right? You have honesty, you have bravery, you have compassion, you have all the. I can't even remember all 7 because that's how lapsed I am. But basically, it's just literally how to be a good person, how to lead a good life, how to be a good person, how to be a responsible citizen of this planet. And I heartily believe that. I subscribe to it. Occasionally I make mistakes and I wander, but again, as I said earlier, I'm human. We're all human. Right. We do make those mistakes. So I try and live by those 7 grandfather teachings, which I don't think is a fundamentalist thing. I just think it's a smart thing.
Right. And the 7th generation thinking too, right?
Exactly. Every decision we make will have repercussions for the next 7 generations.
And also, isn't it also that what came before you for 7 generations will dictate where you go for the next 7 generations? I thought there was a part of that.
That is part of it. The thing you have to keep in mind too about that whole thing is the fact that here I'm going to give you what is supposedly an inaccurate translation of a story that may or may not have actually happened. The Chief Seattle metaphor, that we are all just strands in the spider web of life. Essentially true, but they're not sure if he actually said that since he did not speak English, and it was written in an article about the situation that they think the journalist actually created. But it's a good sentiment.
Right.
It's one of these things where if it's not true, it should be true.
Chief Seattle has some great quotes. You're telling me none of them are real?
Some of them aren't real. I don't know. I haven't written that biography yet.
Yeah, that would be a good one. I find that one very interesting. Not a lot of, I don't see, just like in white culture, I don't see, what's the position of women in the culture at this point?
Oh, very strong. I mean, some cultures are just blatantly, if that's the right terminology, matriarchal or matrilineal, where, amongst the Haudenosaunee, it was them who, the clan mothers who would decide who were the chiefs, who were the war chiefs, and they could appoint you and they could remove you.
Right.
Right? And you have, in almost every culture, strong women. I was raised by my mother. I was raised by my aunts. We're supposedly a patriarchal culture, but there's a line in one of my plays that says, "You show me an Anishinaabe home where the woman doesn't run everything, and I'll show you a single father family." And there's a saying, I think it's a Cheyenne saying, that a nation is not defeated until the hearts of its women are on the ground.
Wow, that's powerful. Native Star Trek. Got to get that one done.
I'm sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for that call.
Rick Berman.
Call me. I'm cheap. We'll work for baloney.
Ooh, I hated baloney.
Oh, it's the creator's food.
Yeah.
There's that whole
Our creator's food is smoked meat, corned beef, pastrami. That was creator's food.
not smoked salmon.
Lox, yeah. Well, I'm North African. We weren't into the smoked salmon. That was a European thing. So were all those other things, by the way. Our food was lamb, chicken, couscous, stuff like that. We're Arab Jews. We're a different type. Because everybody has their hybrids. We all talk about our purities, right?
Of course.
Well, I'm pure this, I'm pure that, but we're all a bunch of mutts.
My standard joke, as I'm sure you found out, is I'm half Ojibway, half Caucasian. So technically that makes me an occasion. A special occasion, if not a memorable occasion.
So your dad was Caucasian?
To the best of my knowledge. I have it on good authority. I have white blood, but I can't prove it.
Do you ever struggle with any of that?
I did at one point, but as I said, I grew up on the reserve till I was 18. So
right.
I'm culturally indigenous. I was raised in that environment. I have no idea who my father is or any of that culture. So other than the eyes and the skin, that has really not really been a part of who I am. Though the early part of my career, I started off writing essays, and then I started off in theater and the occasional beachcombers. I dealt with identity.
Yeah.
I wrote an essay once just because I was annoyed with the world about what it was like living in Toronto and growing up on the reserve, being a fair-skinned Indigenous person, and it was called "Pretty Like a White Boy," the Adventures of a Blue-Eyed Ojibway, and I got in. I was in a cab, I think, and this was around just after Oka, and the cab driver was talking about Oka, and he said if it had been up to me, I would have tear gassed the place in the second day.
Wow.
And it would have been over, and I realized he didn't know I was Native. So I got home, my mind was browning, I was going all over the place, and I did something I almost never do. I got up and I started writing. I never write at night because it gets your brain going, and it's hard to wind back down. Right. And this sort of reminded me about all these different things that had happened in my life with about people, both Native and non-Native people, who had trouble, either did not know or had trouble believing I was Native. So I wrote this essay called Pretty Like a White Boy, and it was literally 54 lines, one page of a computer screen, because I remember back then my computer had 54 lines, and I started ... and I did rant for 52 lines, and then I ended with ... and I went to bed. And I got up, and I reread it, and I thought, oh, there's actually something here. This is interesting. But it had no shape. It had no structure. I had to, give it an intro, give it a mid-body discussion, and end with a conclusion. And I spent about 4 days working on it, and became this really interesting essay that I sold to this magazine. And now it's actually one of the things that I'm most known about, because it's taught in a lot of universities in humanity courses, because it deals with being mixed blood, but from a humorous perspective.
And what do you say in it?
Well, I say I get, I've gotten flack from Native people. I've gotten flack from non-Native people about what it means to be Native and what they think I am, and it's difficult. So after listing all these different things that happened to me, like for instance, once I was shooting a documentary with these two sisters who were women trappers up in northern Ontario, and they were there's this little girl they were looking after, a Native girl, who absolutely refused to believe I was Native. Just would not believe I was Native. And so after we finished shooting, we came back and we were packing up the equipment, and this little 11-year-old girl who had, I guess, taken a shine to me was talking away, and she said, would you like some tea? And I was busy, and I said, no, I don't. I don't want any tea right now. And she suddenly points at me in victory and says, "See, you're not Native. All Indians drink tea." So I just sort of all these different things about being white and being Native, and
having to prove it,
and things. But it was all humor based, and as I said, it became one of the things I was most known for.
So if you didn't have the humor and you moved it aside, what would be underneath it?
There'd be a little bit of anger. I choose humor over anger. Given a choice of making somebody angry, making somebody laugh, or making somebody cry, I will choose to make them laugh. Because you can teach as much through humor as you can through straight, angry drama or sad drama. In fact, if anything, it makes it much more palatable. Tom King and I have talked about this, where if you have somebody on a street corner standing on a box screaming at the world, you'll stop, you'll look, and you'll walk on and completely ignore them. But if you get told the same message wrapped in humor, you'll stop, you'll listen, you'll laugh, and you'll go on. Why do you think 3/4 of America get their news from The Daily Show and Saturday Night Live?
Right. Easier to take. The laugh can help. I mean, the crying can help too, though.
Well, it's cathartic. Yes, it can help. It can
Like
help.
sometimes they say the spiritual life is only possible through the broken heart. Right?
Well, I mean, you look at the Greek mask, right? Comedy and tragedy.
Right.
They're two sides of the same thing. Was it Woody Allen or somebody who said comedy is tragedy plus time?
Right. Exactly. What's the name of the latest book?
It's called Chasing Painted Horses, and it's a drama with lots of humor, whereas Motorcycle and Sweetgrass was humor with some drama.
Right.
So it's actually a serious story that I've tried to punch up with humor.
And who's putting it out?
Cormorant Press.
Right. Do you work with them a lot?
This is my first book with them.
Yeah, I didn't think you worked with them a lot. Oh, cool. And it's available anywhere?
It should be, or we need a new distributor.
Which you could find out, unfortunately, was true. And then you were, great.
Yay!
I thought that was a joke. Well, I thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Bueno, mucho bueno.
Mucho. You've been in Mexico for what, how many days?
Well, it was almost 3 weeks.
Well, great, because I'm fluent, so we can try this. So anything else you want to say in Spanish?
Dos cerveza, por favor.
Frío.
Frío?
Yeah, cold.
Oh, cold.
Dos cervezas frío, por favor. Yeah, not free. That's a whole other thing. Drew Hayden Taylor, and I thank you very much, seriously. Really appreciate you doing this with me. And I wish you nothing but luck in getting all of this stuff, this beautiful stuff that continue to flow through you, because your level of production is prodigious, but the talent that's in there is fantastic. So I really appreciate that you do what you do.
Miigwech.
Miigwech. I'm Ralph Benmergui. Not That Kind of Rabbi is the name of this particular podcast. Mike, can you tell them how they can find us?
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and 100 other podcatchers. We're everywhere.
Podcatchers, I like that. You can also get me at Ralph Benmergui on Twitter, Ralph Benmergui on Facebook, and ralphbenmergui@gmail.com. If you'd like to drop me a line, tell me what you think of the show. But please, if you enjoy it, subscribe. We're building the little Not That Kind of Rabbi Nation bit by bit here, and every little bit helps. So take care of each other, and we'll see you again soon.
Capel Valley, oh Saskatchewan. Capel Valley, oh
This podcast has been produced by TMDS and accelerated by Roam Phone. Roam Phone brings you the most reliable virtual phone service to run your business and protect your home number from unwanted calls. Visit roamphone.ca to get started.